It bothers me that my father made more money than me in the 80s and 90s than I do now. My father was a maintenance mechanic at IBM making $38 an hour. Today, I am a machinist setup programmer making $35 an hour. It's similar sort of work. I also work twice as much as he did. Something doesn't fooling add up. Story 1. My parents spent about $250, $300 a week in the 80s and 90s on smoking, drinking, and gambling. Dad was a plant operator and Mum was a cleaner. My budget is $100 a week on food currently, and I have a couple uni degrees. I don't smoke or gamble and feel guilty spending if I spend $20 on a bottle of wine a week, which I don't do every week. Just how? I miss eating decent food. Story 2. Same here, I'm a robotic programmer making about $60,000 a year. My father was a maintenance man at Ford's and made, I want to say, around $70,000, maybe $75,000. But my father had 3 kids and a wife who works a decent job at $50,000 a year. Oh, wait. My wife makes $75,000, and we still live in a shittier home with no kids. I agree something doesn't add up. Story 3. I basically watched this happen, or at least the fallout at a factory. It was locally owned, making a very technical product. They hired young people. Unfortunately, they just straight up discriminated and did not hire women until the early 2000s. They invested in their workers and trained them. The pay was extremely good, especially for the area, both on the floor and in the office. People bought houses in it, had kids, retired. They had generous pensions. But the boomer owners got greedy and didn't want to just sell, they sold out. New owners decided the quickest thing they could do to save money was in the apprenticeship program. Then they had a skilled worker shortage. Then they froze pay and would only hire temps through an agency, making peanuts. You could get more once you were hired on, but not much. No more benefits. Certainly no pension. The entire area started falling into more economic despair as a result, and the people definitely did. Story 4. My mother-in-law had a job making $70,000 a year as a factory scheduler. So she made the schedules for what truck driver would work Monday versus Tuesday, etc. Her film reproduction degree was a 1-year course to turn VHS tapes into CDs. Since she now has 20 years of experience, she is now making well over $100,000. If you tried making $70,000 in that position now, you'd need a master's and 5 to 7 years of experience. She literally walked into the place she worked on her lunch break and got hired. Story 5. Yeah, I mean, if you're doing that consistently, then you're looking at $75K a year. That's a respectable wage for a full-time career server depending on where you live. For me in South Florida, I really need to be pushing 500 at least once a week and a couple 400s. 300 has to be on the low end, honestly, for me to feel comfortable. Unfortunately, man, it's so sporadic, especially in a seasonal town. A lot of places I've worked in this country, you make all of your money in 3 or 4 months, and then it's a ghost town the rest of the year. I worked seasonally for most of my 20s in national parks or lake towns. That is one hell of a hectic lifestyle, moving every few months out of state, trying to follow the money with the snowbirds. Story 6. I made $97 this year at my dinner job. I work 3 to 10 or 11 p.m. 5 nights a week. We open at 5. The first 2 hours are setting up listening to Grateful Dead or bluegrass. There's definitely some undeniable chillness to the job, but it is leveled out by the gut-wrenching constant interactions with middle-aged to elderly Karens. I mean, my sanity is tested daily and I am burnt out by the end of the first wave of tables. I work a breakfast-lunch job 3 or 4 days a week as well during season, winter, from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Normally make $150, $200 a day there. It's closer to $110, give or take a few grand annually. I live in South Florida, so it's like $3,000 for a nice 1-bedroom with amenities. Or like me, $2,000 for a bare-bones 2-1 with no amenities on the edge of the ghetto, because I have my 2-year-old son Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. My car insurance is like $420 a month. This city definitely sucks you dry financially, so if you're not making close to 6 figures, especially as a single father, then you're struggling to pay the bills. let alone save or pay off debt. Story 7. What don't you understand? People voted to move money away from the workers and into the stock market. Look at how many billionaires we have now and multimillionaires. We wouldn't have them if wages kept up with inflation. It's cool that 5 guys have more money than hundreds of millions of people combined. It's not evil at all for people to hoard more money than they could spend in thousands of years. Story 8. Yeah, pay has pretty much stagnated at least since the 90s. Meanwhile, the cost of everything surely hasn't. Just for fun, throw that in an inflation calculator. Let's say your dad was making 38 HR in 1985. That's the equivalent to over 100 HR today. Story 9. I'm pretty sure these calculations are just wrong. I worked with payroll at a unionized factory in the early 2000s, and even the skilled trades didn't a straight hourly rate over $30 an hour. Now, with overtime and double time, they made a ton of money, but an hourly rate of $38 in the 1980s was unheard of. Story 10. People claim that is adjusted for inflation. I believe it would be better to compare and look at the percentage of income spent for expenses then versus now, rather than trying to make yesterday's money change to today's rates. Back then, people struggled to save and buy things too. Today's society doesn't account for so many additional expenses that didn't exist back then, like computers, cell phones, internet, streaming services, although there was cable in the late 80s. If people weren't spending so much on those things, they would have better cash flow. Spending over $100 a month for cell phone and service and $50 or $70 a month for internet adds up fast. Story 11. I don't. But depending on their spouse's income and COL, they could still be broke. I was making high 20s 2 years ago and had just enough income to do my only hobby, shooting matches, shot no rounds outside of actual competition, and worked matches to pay for them. All my disposable income went to that, and it was about $1,000, $1,500 a year. Story 12. Yeah, but it's possible in the 80s doing maintenance on one-of-a-kind machinery that was making cutting-edge technology at the time. Stuff is designed way more user-friendly and maintenance-friendly nowadays with much better diagnostic tools. Even just cars mechanics had to know much more back then to figure out what the problem was. It was easier to fix when you knew what was wrong back then, but figuring out what was wrong was much harder before we onboard diagnostics. Now the figuring out what's wrong is easier, but fixing a lot of the stuff is harder on cars. Story 13. Only thing I can think of is I wonder if that position was much rarer and more in demand back then as opposed to now. I'm thinking that in today's tech world, there are more people that do your line of work than 35 years ago. 35-eyed HR is still not bad, though. Story 14. My parents were able to buy a 2-acre lot and build a 2000 SQFT home on that lot in 1992 worth $700,000 when they sold it. I can barely afford a $300,000 home now. I feel like I'm vastly behind what they were able to accomplish in their 30s, and now I'm 34. Story 15. I used 38 X hours x 52 weeks for a rough gross estimate, so before taxes, 1985 versus 2025. According to our friend in2013dollars.com, $79,040 in 1985 is equivalent in purchasing power to about $231,752 per 48-hour today, an increase of $152,712. 48 over 40 years. The dollar had an average inflation rate of 2.73% per year between 1985 and today, producing a cumulative price increase of 193.21%. A dollar today only buys 105% of what it could buy back then. Computing was highly specialized then. My sister, a lot older than me, made about $350 an hour fresh out of high school as a data entry processor in the Great Lakes, non-major city area, or $7,280 a year. Comparably, that's $21,345 today. You can compare other 1985 earnings, x52 here for U.S. jobs. Multiply the weekly by 52 for annual salary, then go to the inflation calculator and compare. Regardless of profession, our dollar only earns 34% of what it used to. Also, keep in mind, we required much less to live on as far as rents, yes, but people could get by with no TV or no phone or rabbit ear antenna TV and one house phone, rent, heat, car or public transport, and gas if you had a car. Life was largely still analog, and you could make do on much less, as life's expectations didn't include digital connectedness. Even banking now often requires smart technology, leaving more people unbanked. It's wild to think about the changes, honestly. So, OP, your comments track. Largely, we work harder, produce more, rest less, and earn less to require more to live.